Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's training. My name is Alyssa Fader. I am the training director here at Emily's List and really appreciate you all taking your time to learn with us today. Really excited to teach you this very specific and really important skill, and really grateful that you decided to spend some time with us in these crazy, crazy times. I wanted to start off by telling you a little bit about Emily's List and what this program is all about. So Emily's List is the largest resource for women in politics. We recruit and train Democratic women up and down the ballot who are pro-choice and want to run for office. Since our founding in 1985, we've helped elect over 100 women to the House, 26 to the Senate, 16 governors, and nearly 1,100 women to state and local office, all of which are numbers I imagine will increase dramatically in this November's election. This training is part of our Run to Win webinar training series, which we run quite often, as you know, if you're on our email list. And it's designed to help folks like you gain all of the tools that you need to be successful in your runs for office. So this training today is going to cover the specific sliver of campaigning that is rapid response. There's also a ton more information on our website and in our training center, which I'll tell you about later on. So to get us started, I wanted to just talk about our webinar norms, and then I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. The first is to invest in our time together. We only have an hour here, and you're going to get out of the webinar as much as you put into it. So please be interactive in the places where appropriate, and make sure that, I know there's a lot going on the internet, try and keep your focus here while we have you. The second is all questions are valid. Please type them into the text box in your webinar toolbar. We're going to have a Q&A section at the end of the training. So put questions as they come to you, and put questions at the Q&A spot, and we will take them. And the last is that the slides are internal. This webinar is being recorded, so you will get a recording of the webinar after the fact. So if it goes too quickly for you to take notes or anything like that, don't worry about it. You will receive this content. So I wanted to kick it off by handing it over to our presenters for today. First, Ben Dotson, who is the Vice President for Digital here at Emily's List, and Christina Reynolds, who is the Vice President for Communications, also here at Emily's List, and who also used to be Barack Obama's Rapid Response Director. So very excited to have them both here. You are in very good hands. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ben.
Great. Well, we are so excited to be with everyone today to talk to you about something that not only are we passionate about, that will be very useful for you. We are heading into these last 90 days before the election, the period where it all heats up. We oftentimes call this silly season, and for good reason. All of the things that are going to come at your campaign during this time are going to be in this sort of pressure cooker of what these last few months are like. But the thing is, with good preparation, you can be ready to deal with any of the problems that come your way. So just a little housekeeping up front. So you've heard the welcome here, and we're gonna get started. We have a few announcements first. We're gonna talk you through how to prepare for attacks. This is how to look into your background and think through the things that could be coming your way, how to be prepared. We're gonna talk about the rules of crisis management. There are some basic concepts that you can get down, and that they work for you regardless of your circumstance. Again, the same things that you're going to use on a local campaign or a big campaign, regardless of the size, the same basic rules govern how you're going to respond. And then finally, toward the end, we'll take a question and answer break where you can give us real issues that you're addressing in your campaign, and we'll help you think through a little bit how you might address them. So next slide, great. So just a few goals for this webinar. Here's what you're gonna learn today. So you're gonna learn how to anticipate and plan for attacks, how to do research on yourself, look into your own background, think about the things that you've gone through in your life and how to anticipate those things, and then think through your responses. Again, you can do most of what you need to do to respond to an attack ahead of time. And that'll mean you're so much better prepared for what's gonna come your way. Second, you're gonna learn the rules for responding, those basic ideas that'll govern your response regardless of what the specific crisis is, and that will give you a steady hand as you prepare to address the challenges coming your way. And then finally, the third piece is understand how to track a response. So you respond, then what happens? And so we'll talk you through how to understand how your response is received, how it works, and then how you adapt your campaign and move forward. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Christina.
I was muted. I apologize. First rule of rapid response, prepare for unmuting yourself in today's era. I thank you all for joining. We really appreciate the work that you're doing and the ways in which you're getting ready to run or actually running your campaign. We hope that this is helpful. Preparing for the attacks is the most important part of rapid response. I know you think, hold on, response happens in response to something, but the reality is most attacks you can prepare for in a variety of ways. And I will say, I've worked on 5 different presidential races, including most recently dealing with some response against Donald Trump, which is, as you might have imagined, a little crazy. You throw out a lot of the rule books there. But one of the things that we learned is even if you can't predict exactly what's coming at you, you can have a plan for how to deal with it and how to keep your campaign running. So if we can go to the next slide. So preparation, what does that mean? That means a few things, and we're going to go into these in a little bit more detail. But first, gather your facts. I am a former researcher. I can tell you that the most important person that you can research or thing you can do on a campaign to get started is do your research on yourself. What does that mean? That means looking at social media. It means looking at what someone can find publicly about you. What's out there? Have you talked to the press before? If so, what's out there? Have you filed your taxes on time? Have you voted? Because a lot of times people will knock politicians for asking people to vote when they haven't done it. The other thing that so in doing that, you learn what's going to come at you. You think through what's going to happen then. And that allows you to think through what the most likely attacks are going to be. Another thing that you need to do, and we'll talk about dealing with those individual attacks, but is think about your response process. This is where each individual campaign will do this a little differently, but you need to think about your process before the proverbial you know what hits the proverbial fan. So what that means is when an attack comes, who on your campaign, even if that campaign is just you and one other person or you and some volunteers, who deals with the response? Who is the person who flags it for, you know, if you have volunteers who are helping with the press, who flags it for that person? Who needs to be involved? If it's an attack on, let's say, your family, who is the person who tells your family member that it's happened? In most cases, they want to hear it from you, but you need to think through that in advance. And if you think you may need to put something out publicly, who needs to sign off on that? Is that something you need to sign off on, your campaign manager? Is there anybody else who's going to need to weigh in? Think about that in advance, because once you get to the moment, it's really hard. And then in addition on preparation, you need to plan for validators. And we'll talk in a little more detail about that, but what that means is if you know that someone's going to come at you and say, well, this person, for example, is new to the community, then you need to think about who are community members who can stand up and say they're new, but they came here and they got involved, or they're new, but I know in their last community they did this and we're excited for them to do the same for us. Validators are people who will stand up for you on a specific issue or just in general and say that you are worth voting for. And so thinking through that is a part of every campaign, but it's also an important part of rapid response. Ben?
Yeah, and so you really have to think through, bottom line, you have to think through who are the validators in your area, in your community on a given issue, right? So this can be community leaders, it can be friends, it can be business leaders, it can be elected officials. Think through who those people are ahead of time and then think through what issues they can speak to you about. And here's the thing, it's important to communicate with them ahead of time and to make sure that they know you're sort of they're in your kitchen cabinet, if you will, of people that you're going to turn to during moments of duress to pull them in and help you respond to things. So, but again, bottom line, allies can really help you weather a storm. So think big picture about your strategy here and think about who you can pull into your orbit. Next slide.
So the roles for rapid response vary, but when we think about rapid response, we think about a few things. One is communicating the response itself. So when a response comes in, and we'll talk more about this, we need to think about how we're going to get it to the people who may have heard it, to the people who may have been affected by it. Sometimes that's the media. I'm a press person, and so that's what I always think about. But sometimes it's your supporters. Sometimes it's something that you need to be the voice of yourself. Sometimes it's something where, again, you want those validators. And so the roles for rapid response include thinking through who's going to write the response, who's going to gather the facts about it. One of the things that we always tell people is remember that not every attack is true. In an era of Donald Trump, we probably need less reminder of that. But who's going to gather the facts? Who's going to put together what you're going to say, and who's going to communicate that to the people who need to hear it? Those are some key. And then what's your role as the candidate? It may be some of those other roles, but that's something when we talk about roles that we want you to think about in advance.
And one of the things I often tell people here, this is sort of the pro tip about roles and responsibilities in crisis communications, is it's important that you've communicated those roles across your campaign team. In the midst of a crisis, things move really fast, and you don't want people tripping over each other as they try to figure out who is doing what. So in addition to identifying who is going to do each of these pieces ahead of time, you want to make sure that you've talked to those individual members of your team or your community that are going to be involved ahead of time, and then that everyone knows who is doing what. So again, those roles and those responsibilities are really clear. And this all goes to the bottom line of preparing as much as you can ahead of time so that you're ready when the moment hits. Crises come fast and they move fast, and so you want to be ready to go. But again, make sure that roles and responsibilities on your team are clear and are communicated to everyone. Next up.
All right, time is of the essence. Here's the thing. We need, and there's actually an addition, I'm going to add an additional clause at the end of this sentence. Your response has to be both fast and accurate. We used to say when I started in research, speed kills, and that means two things. When you're fast, you can kill an attack sometimes, but if you're too slow, the attack can kill you. And so that's one of the things that we always think about is it needs to be fast, but it also needs to be right. If any of us think hard enough, we can think about a scandal where a politician has gotten in trouble by giving an answer that didn't quite cover the truth, that didn't quite cover the depth of their involvement, of their issue, of all of those things, because they didn't get it right. And the third thing that I would just add on here is you also have to be thoughtful. Think through your audience, think through your allies, think through what your response will mean to them. And a good response is all three things. One of the things that we always think about when it comes to response is setting a deadline to say we need to know as much as we can by this point, and then we're going to come up with a response. As we all know, you watch the news, you know there's no such thing as a news cycle. The news breaks by minute. But thinking through, if it's a reporter has come to you with an attack, think about what their deadline is and make sure you work backwards and give yourself enough time to think through all the things, to gather as many facts as you can, and so on. And to be able to say what you don't know if necessary. You don't want to go out early without all the facts. You don't want to go out too late so you miss the opportunity to shape a story. It is a delicate balance, and I would argue one of the hardest things about doing response, but that's something that you really need to figure out is how do I get both of those things? And if I can't gather all of the facts in time to be fast enough to get in a story, then you need to figure out a response that acknowledges that in some way, or at least allows you some leeway to come back with more or in hopefully better facts. Next slide. All right. So we've got the rules for crisis management, and as Alyssa and Ben mentioned in the beginning, the rules apply across the board. I can tell you that when I worked for Barack Obama, we got hit with some attacks that probably no presidential candidate had ever been hit with before. And the rules for that were the same as when I woke up at 7 a.m. one day on the Clinton campaign and discovered that Donald Trump had attacked a beauty queen that he had worked with for being overweight at 3:15 in the morning, or the same as when he threw out crazy rumors about Hillary Clinton, or the same as a Senate candidate I worked with who got accused of a variety of different things, none of which were true. The rules remain the same, and that's part of why, that's part of why we want to talk to you, is that if you build out a plan and you think through the rules, you'll be able to deal with a crisis and get through it. So next slide. Okay, an attack happens. Now what? Step number one, don't crawl under your desk. Here's the reality. In today's world, I don't believe there's any such thing as a silver bullet of an attack. Donald Trump is president. We've all seen the stuff that came at him. What I do believe is that how you respond to an attack determines if you can survive it. I can tell you that of all the amazing women that we elected in 2018, every single one of them got attacks that I'm certain their campaign felt terrible at the time, felt unsurvivable, or felt like this is really going to do me in. And what they did was they put their head down, not under their desk, but they put their head down and they thought about it and they responded carefully and they kept talking to voters about the things that matter. And that's something that we'll come back to, is making sure that your campaign continues. But so an attack happens, what do? Let's go to the next slide. Step number one, as we mentioned, you gather the facts. You figure out as much as you can, as quickly as you can. You know what you can know. Again, the number one thing in this process is do not assume that the attack itself or every piece of the attack is true. Don't assume that any piece of the attack is true. Go find out the facts. I cannot tell you the volume of attacks that I have seen where the candidate sort of accepted the premise, and when we dug in further, we realized, no, that's not true, and got a reporter not to even write about it. That's the goal, but sometimes attacks are true, sometimes they're partially true. Figure out what the facts are, and figure out what the facts are in your response is the very first step. Ben?
So really, everything that we're about to talk about in terms of these questions gets down to determining what the proportional response to an attack is. And so you really have to think of a couple of dynamics here. The first is, who is attacking you? Is it a community group? Is it a statewide group? Is it an in-state group or an out-of-state group, a small group or a big group, a moneyed interest? Is it a special interest? Is it a party group or not? Think about who it is, right? And then think in your head of like, on a sort of scaled sense, like what kind of response does that justify? The other dimension to think about here is that where is the response coming at you from? Or where's the attack coming from? Is the attack just a comment on social media? Is it a comment to a reporter in a news story? Is it on TV? Is it in print? Is it online? Where is the response? Because again, both of these factors, who is it and where is it coming at you from, will determine how you respond. Again, it goes back to the notion of thinking about like where you want to sort of reply in a like fashion. If we go to the next slide, this is where I like to talk about this. So you're going to actually have to decide what you say. And so I think about this in a couple of different ways. So is it something that is true and you're going to have to acknowledge it? Is it something that's false and you're going to have to rebut it? And then what method are you going to use to do that? Are you going to respond in an op-ed? Are you going to respond on social media? Are you going to give a statement to a reporter or to reporters? How are you going to do that? Here's the thing. If you take nothing else away from our training today, it is this. Don't repeat the attack. Straight up. It just reinforces it. I am sure Christina's going to have more to add on that, but don't repeat the attack.
Amen, and applause for that one, Ben. I'm going to come back to that in a second. I just want to say, for any of you who've ever heard the phrase, don't bring a knife to a gunfight, the flip side of that is don't bring an Uzi when someone's throwing a pebble at you. You know, the reality is we all are human beings. You see a comment on Twitter and you think this is devastating and people are going to see this and they're going to believe this about me and I have to respond. And the reality is No, you don't normally. That person with a few followers on Twitter does not deserve a TV ad, does not deserve a piece of one of your speeches to campaign supporters. They don't deserve to live rent-free in your head, right? That's the number one thing. And it's why we sometimes recommend have somebody else read the comments for you, but make sure, and probably for your spouse or your mom or your kids. But I would say, make sure the proportionate response is a really important thing here. We talk about attacks as fires that need oxygen to grow. And when you are giving oxygen to something, you are helping it get bigger. And that's part of what you have to decide. One of the things here when we say determine your response is determine if you're going to respond, because I think that's an important thing. And to get back to Ben's very, very good point, and it is hard and you have to practice this, do not repeat the attack. There is no reason to let someone have in your voice, under your name, under your campaign's name, something that is negative about you. Even if you feel like I need to explain it away, remember that you can explain it away without repeating, I know that my opponent says that I will do X, Y, and Z. Nope. Just say, my belief is X, Y, and Z, or my opponent is wrong, his attacks are false, and I will do this. It takes practice. I can tell you that I've been doing this for 25 years and I slip into repeating the attack because you want to help the listener and the reader jump to the right point in the conversation. But when you do that, you are putting something bad about you in your voice, and that's not great. So next slide. Okay, respond. So there, done. We're done here. It's easy, right? We've talked about make sure it's proportionate. We've talked about being careful. We've talked about making sure that we talked about. Sorry, there's things happening in the room here. We've talked about being careful. But also, I apologize, team, movement, it distracted me. You write your response, you think about what the individual thing is, and then you're not done. We all want to think, okay, I got the response out, the attack is handled. Except that, as we all know, there's what we call in the press a second day story, right? There's the next steps. There are the things that happen afterwards. So take a look and make sure that you're covering what's the response to your response, online with reporters who cover you and so on. Has someone taken something the wrong way? Has someone added an attack? Some campaigns will measure out attacks, hoping that you take the bait on something. And then you recalibrate as necessary. You figure out, do I need to go out again? Do I need to address this in a different way? Do I need to address this with a different audience? Ben?
Great. And then again, after your attack or after your response goes out, I often tell people, think about all of the places folks are having discussions about you and about your campaign. They're having discussions in the media, of course, but they're also having discussions on social media, and really think about the various people that are going to be consuming this. We mentioned earlier briefly the notion of paying attention to your community, your supporters in particular, right? So as you're moving a campaign, you're thinking about a few important constituencies. You're thinking about voters that might vote for you. You're thinking about donors who've already supported you, volunteers who support you. And you really need to think about not only what do each of these groups need to hear and think specific, because the message might be a little bit different depending on them and depending on what you've asked them to do in your campaign. But then on top of that, you need to watch them after and talk to them after to make sure that they've heard what they need to and how they've responded, and see if you need to do any additional follow-up. This particularly comes into play sometimes with donors, where if they've been supporting your campaign, they have a higher level of investment, not only in your success, but in what happens to you overall. And so you think about who each of these groups are and sort of what they need to hear and what the follow-up after the response needs to look like. So next slide. So again, rules to remember. So first, don't let a crisis take over your campaign. it can be easy in the course of something happening. It can be easy in the course of something happening to let everyone sort of lose their minds, and suddenly everything goes to focus on responding to an attack. But the reality is you have votes to get, and you have voters to persuade, you have money to raise, and you have information to get out. And the reality is, if you go back to your plan and you think through your crisis comms plan and what your roles and responsibilities are, that should be built with the idea of keeping this within its sort of lane within your campaign. I often think about this as like, when these things happen, you keep one part of your campaign focused on the normal day-to-day activities, and then you let the people who have response to do the response, and you make sure that everyone is sort of keeping the normal trend of the campaign going. Yes.
Can I jump in here, Ben, before you go on to the next rule? I'm going to give you all an example of this, which is that when we found out 11 days before the election on the Clinton campaign that there was a new FBI investigation, there was a tendency, I think we all probably threw up a little, and but there was a tendency to think, oh, of course, that's all anyone focused on, except that we were 11 days out. And for however much that mattered, my job was Trump. And so I still had to think about, what are we saying about Donald Trump's event that's happening right now? What are we doing in response to this thing that he said and this story that's coming out, and so on and so forth? And that's just within the communications world. Even, we had people talking to voters. You have to remember that the negative tends to live in our heads, and those of us who, right now, that's never more true, right? You live in the negative, and it feels all encompassing. It is not for voters. They are dealing with a lot of different things. Your allies are dealing with a lot of different things, and so keep in mind that what feels awful and like the end of the world for you may not be a major focus of your voters. They may not be that concerned about it. And that means that you still need to be talking to them about voting, talking to them about your issues, talking to them about policy, and so on and so forth, and keep the campaign moving. So to Ben's point, if you can wall a little bit off, if you can figure out ways to just make sure that the rest of the work happens, you'll be far better off.
Totally. And then don't get defensive or take the attack personally. Listen, it can feel personal, and it can feel so big that it takes over your world. And particularly if it's about something in your background and it gets to who you view yourself as a person and as a candidate, it can be very hard to not take it personally. But the reality is that it's a campaign, and these things are going to happen. And if you've thought about it ahead of time, and if you've planned for it, you ultimately get to decide how you react. It's sort of it's the Mr. Rogers takeaway of all of this, is like, you decide how you respond. You are in control of what happens. And again, in crises, there are many things that you don't control, but your response is the one that you control completely.
And then the last one, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ben. I was just going to say, keep your response proportionate to the attack. Again, we've talked about this, but in our business, we call it message discipline. We drill in the key points. Keeping that response proportionate to the attack also means thinking about which attacks you're going to let go. And Ben pointed out earlier, you need to think about your voters. There's no candidate in America who's aiming to get 100% of the vote. That's just not how elections work, right? You have figured out what your vote is, who are your 50+1, 50+2, whatever it is, and who are the swing voters. And keep in mind that some of these attacks they're not aimed at your people, or they're not convincing to your people, or they're not being read by your people, and therefore, or the people that you are aiming at, even the persuasion voters. And so just keep that in mind as you're thinking about it. Is the proportionate part also means the decision to respond.
Great. I think we are ready to take some questions, I believe. I think Alyssa's going to come back on.
Hello, I'm here. Thank you guys my face is not in this picture. Hello.
There she
thank
is.
you guys so much. I've learned so many things. This is so interesting, and I know so many people who I'm going to send the recording to. after this is done. I mean that sincerely. And very excited to get into some questions. So we texted the attendees earlier today, and so we have some questions in advance. I'm going to start with those, and then if folks have other questions, please put them in the chat and we will try and get to them. The first question is about if there are times in which, how do you determine if something is necessary to respond to, and when is silence sometimes a better option? Which I think, Christina, perhaps we'll start with you.
Sure, and we've gotten into this a little bit, but I do think it's an important question. I think part of the question is, what is your response? Does your response, I apologize, there's some power washing going on outside my mom's house right now. I'm visiting, so my apologies for the noise. If you're wondering what's happening, I'm not under attack. Physically or metaphorically, I suppose. I think that the important thing to keep in mind here is, how is this attack going to land with the people I need to vote for me? So that means your base, and it means the people that you're trying to swing into your base, right? And thinking about that, is it compelling to them? Are they likely to see it? So these are the things that Ben talked about in terms of, how's the attack coming? Who's seeing it? What is the messenger? You have to think about all of those things. And if the argument is, for example, it's coming from someone who matters, who undercuts either the attack itself or the messenger undercuts something that is a strong part of your message, your credibility, then you probably need to respond. If it's coming from if it's an attack that is going to get at something that that is a compelling part of your story, you probably need to respond. Again, that's where thinking about the venue is really important. If it's, if it comes in Twitter, don't run a TV ad on it yet. See if people, are people talking about it? Is it, is it mattering? And make sure that you're also responding so the people who see the attack are likely to see the response. I've seen before, Ben can probably get into this more, campaigns that get an attack via Twitter and respond via Facebook. Well, okay, those aren't always the same audiences, right? And so I would say that's one thing. And the other thing is, think about what your response is. If your response is just not helpful, if there are just bad facts around it, then it's sometimes either a short response and moving on, or, or maybe silence is best. And that's something to think about. There are just times when the attack is just, it is an actual vulnerability. And here's what I would say. Like I said, I do believe there are no silver bullets. I do think there are times when we think about our vulnerabilities and we think about them in different ways. Stacey Abrams did a great job of this, where she knew she was going to get attacked because she had a lot of debt. And she came out early and she wrote an op-ed about how I have debt because I helped my parents pay for their house, because I went to expensive schools and I went to law school and all of those things. And I'm like, whatever percent of Georgians who have student loan debt, who have housing debt. It's not that unusual. And, and it means that I understand what they're dealing with. If you can think about that, sometimes you want to preempt an attack or get out there on it. But think about how, what are the facts and how can I turn it to my advantage? And if the answer is the facts are bad and it's just not, my response doesn't change that, then that's something else to consider in the notch of maybe no response. Ben?
Absolutely. I think, yeah, the Stacey example is a great one, where a candidate was able to really flip the script and turn a negative into a positive. And that's what you can do in the best of scenarios. Now, to the question about sort of like the where of all of this is, like, yes, you definitely, like, one of the key things I think is important to keep in mind is, like, if someone leaves a nasty comment on your Facebook that has some sort of accusation, and then you issue a press release about it, you've just taken it from a very small audience to a very big audience, right? And so you really have to.
A small audience where reporters are not often. Reporters are more often on Twitter than Facebook, and so you've also flagged it for reporters. Sorry, Ben.
No, that's totally right. And so, like, you really, that's where this, again, it's proportionality of response, but it's also like level of response and making sure that you're not blowing something up that is really much smaller, right? So you want to make sure that you don't make a problem worse rather than making it better.
Awesome, great, thanks guys. Oh, sorry, I keep clicking away. Next question, actually off of that, is someone wanted to know if you should say something to quote unquote tell on yourself or wait for the attack. I think the Stacy example is a good example of a time when you would want to get in front of something. I think it would be interesting to hear from the two of you if there are particular benefits of getting ahead of things and accepting responsibilities for a mistake, and if so, if there are particular categories of things that you think are easier to combat on the front end.
Yeah, here's my hard and fast rule on that. If your prebuttal, if you're what you want to say about that, in the Stacy case, it's the I know, I have debt like most Georgians, and it will allow me to better represent them and understand what they're going through. If your frame and your answer and your prebuttal can markedly change the story, then it is worth doing. If it doesn't, if all it does is put your response into the story and there is no change in how it's read, then I vote for waiting until the attack is levied, and this is why. You are going to find so many things that your opponent is never going to hit you on. I can't tell you, I suspect Ben has had the same thing, the number of times where I have lost sleep over an attack that I knew was coming, and election day came and went, and the Republicans never hit us with it. And so before you proactively do, and I would argue in Stacy's case, she actually viewed that as a positive to her being able to talk about what Georgians were facing, right? It was the contrast between her and a bunch of rich, Republicans who didn't understand the lives of Georgians. But most attacks are not that situation. And so if all you are doing there is getting your attack in the story, I would vote for making sure you're ready with that response, but waiting for it. But that's something that, and it's worth thinking about that with other people, right? Debate that and think that out before you preempt an attack. Because keep in mind, if you're doing that, as Stacy did, you are in fact doing the cardinal rule that we told you not to do, which is repeating the negative, right? It's rare when that's a good idea.
And a corollary I would just mention here is that it's important to always be honest, right? Because if there's something that will make a crisis worse, it is putting out something that's a twist on the truth, or something that's an outright lie, even sometimes the partial truth, right? You want to be really thoughtful about being honest here. This is where preparing ahead of time for the attacks that are going to come your way can help you. And this is why gathering the facts up front is important. Because again, if something isn't true about what you say, or if something gets mixed up in the process, it'll make it worse than it would have been in the first place, because then it's not just an attack levied at you, it's you appearing dishonest. And that is far worse for your campaign.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
Okay, next question. So this person, Sharon, hi Sharon, would like to know some tips on responding to two different types of attacks. One being previously held positions that you've changed your mind on, you have that new information has come to your attention. And the second is attacks based on mischaracterization. So if you could speak to how you think about responding to those two things.
Sure, I'm happy to go, Ben, unless you want to go first. Okay, yes, so the first one, I think the reality is, and I say this as a researcher who has written more than her fair share of flip-flop documents, I think that voters are savvier than we give them credit for. And I think that a movement, because the facts have changed, the situation has changed, what's possible to get past has changed, is something that being honest and saying, this is how I got here and this is why I changed, is not a bad thing for someone to do. In fact, I would argue it makes you sound less like a politician and more like a leader. And that's something that people are looking for. The reality is pointing out, I'll give you an example, and judge me for what you will here, but I worked for John Edwards 3 times. One of them ended very badly. But one thing that I would say is John Edwards voted for the Iraq War, as did Hillary Clinton and most of the candidates who, many of the candidates who ran, certainly in 2004 and then again in 2008. And in between those elections, John decided, he realized that his vote had not been the right vote. Obviously, it was based on flawed information, but he also had regret for that vote overall. And so he wrote an op-ed that said, "I cast the wrong vote and I'm sorry." And I watched throughout that race as so many of the other people, not Barack Obama, who'd been against the war from the beginning, not like Trump, who says he was and wasn't, but sorry, you can't take the research out of the girl. But I watched as so many other candidates in that race twisted themselves in knots to try and argue that, yes, I still thought that was the right vote to cast, even though it seemed clear that they didn't. It seemed clear that they thought we were led into the war on bad facts. And then the question is, great, so do you regret your vote? And they were so scared, some of them, of saying, yes, I regret it, I shouldn't have cast that vote, that they just twisted themselves in knots and sounded like a politician. And so what I would say is, think hard. Don't, this is not I say one thing to one audience and another thing to another audience. It's not political expediency. But if you have changed your mind because you understand things differently, because you had an experience that made you change your mind, or just because you believe things have changed, say it. That's okay. Just make sure that you can defend the position that you're in now and talk about it. And I truly believe, maybe Pollyanna, Ben may jump in and tell me I'm crazy, but I truly believe that voters appreciate someone who they feel like is honest with them and is taking them on that journey and helping them better understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And to the question about how you explain this, so in movement work, we often call this a story of self, right? Where you were and where you are and how you got there. And the key point I would make to you is that a story like this, where you explain your evolution, can be an opportunity to help people see their place in your movement and their place in your campaign and see themselves in you. So don't think about it just as a negative, right? Think about it also as the opportunity to bring your supporters closer to you by telling them a story.
Great. And could you guys talk a little bit about what to do if you have an attack that's based on misinformation?
Oh, correct it. I would say a few things. Number one, you should make sure that you get the facts out there, right? Again, make sure if it's an attack that's based on misinformation. I'm not saying someone launches an attack on you, go, just because it's wrong, go and blow it out. The same rules apply. But for example, we had this happen recently where a reporter came at us and said, this thing that your candidate is saying is not true, and here's why. And we looked at it and we said, wait a minute, their response is not, their attack is not true. And we worked with the reporter, and the story turned out very differently, which was defending our candidate's position and talking about why our opponent was lying about us. So I would say, think about, again, everything is proportionate, everything is in the right audience, but make sure that the facts are in the places they need to be. And by the way, that also means with your volunteers. So if something is getting big, right? Someone is out there saying that you supported school cuts, right? Or you opposed wearing masks during, coronavirus, or whatever it is, and you think, and it's not true, and you're hearing it from your volunteers, then do a volunteer training, or make sure the next time you talk to your volunteers that you just say, hey guys, I want you to understand this, right? And I think it's an important thing to remember that the people who are speaking for you to voters need to know the truth. If an attack has gotten far enough, that make sure that they're armed with the facts. Particularly, again, if the facts are on your side, great, correct that.
Totally.
Also, you have fact checkers in your, not every news outlet does it, but if you have fact checkers and the facts are on your side, this is where sometimes you want to raise it with them and give them the facts and let them, and having an outside arbiter say, no, this is not true is never a bad thing.
And if an issue, to Christina's point, if an issue has gotten big enough where I was going to say when your volunteers are out knocking doors, but we're not knocking on many doors these days. As your people who are phone banking for you or making calls, if it's gotten big enough where they're getting questions about it, make sure that you give them a talking point in their scripts. That's a really simple, easy thing to do. You don't want that. First off, you don't want them sort of freelancing the answer on the phone, right? Because that can be challenging. But you also, again, it's just about making sure that they feel prepared to help you.
Great. All right, and our last question, I think, Ben, we'll go to you for this one first, is folks are interested in hearing, Heather is interested in hearing about best practices about digital communications in crisis. Obviously, that's a really big question, but I think you all have hinted at some really great ideas already, sticking to the platform where the crisis is broke, for example, and if there are any other top tips that you want to give from a digital perspective, and then we'll go to Christina if she has anything to add.
Totally, absolutely. So here's what I think is really important when you think about this. Your communication strategy in a crisis should be fully integrated. So don't think about it in terms of press release here, digital here. Think about it, what are you doing across all the platforms you have to push back, depending on what the size and scale of the crisis is, what's appropriate, not appropriate. But don't think of digital as a sort of silo that sits off to the side. Think about it is digital the appropriate medium? Is something else more appropriate? And so, that is how I think about it. And then I also think I'll say here, this is sort of less crisisy and more just sort of general social strategy. We used to say, don't respond to trolls, just leave them be, right? And to some extent that can still be true, but what I will say is this: part of social media community management is thinking about the experience that your supporters are having on your page. And if it is all trolling, then what you can end up with is a place that is unwelcoming to the people who want to be there. And so you really have to find the right balance in terms of your online community management between blocking and deleting comments and replying to comments, and you have to find that right mix. But we've really kind of moved away from totally ignoring, more into thinking strategically about how to manage that community and what that sort of balance might be. Now, the one thing I will say is that I usually recommend, as the candidate, don't do that yourself, because I think those comments can kind of get inside of your head and really impact your decision-making process in a way that's not healthy. And you, as the candidate, are responsible for a much bigger picture portfolio for your campaign. And so if you have a trusted volunteer, or if you're lucky enough to have a staff member, think about letting that person handle that piece of the response or whatever, because again, you want to make sure that you're focused on the big picture of your campaign.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. If you can avoid reading the comments, don't read the comments. You are wonderful. The exception being our fabulous Run to Win Facebook page, which we view as the happiest place on the internet. But yeah, I think Ben's point is a great one. If you can recruit someone to help out with that, it's just not worth it. And I think that our own boss Stephanie Shriak says that all the time to me. I don't read the comments. I can't do it. So we help her out with that, right, Ben?
Absolutely, yeah.
Great. All right. I think that's all the questions we have for today. So I'm just going to take us through a couple of closing resources. Actually, Ben, why don't you talk us through, or Christina, talk us through these key takeaways, and then I'll get to the resources in a second.
Sure. Totally. So think through your likely attacks. What is there in your think through your background, research your background, prepare for anything that could be coming your way. Think about, financial issues, think about anything you can think of, and think through how people might use that in your campaign and prepare that ahead of time. Create your response plan in advance. Make sure that you've thought through roles and responsibilities. What is the timing going to look like? Who needs to be told? Who needs to be looped in? Has that been communicated across your team? And again, make sure it's ready ahead of time. 3 things that we mentioned earlier that we'll repeat: responses should be fast, they should be accurate, and they should be effective. And then finally, monitor and adjust as needed. So don't just put this out in the world and sort of be like, okay, it's all over now. It's gone away, right? You need to watch how people respond to it, how they consume it, and pay some special attention to your supporters, your donors, your volunteers, and how they're working with that. And then watch the reporters and how the discussion is evolving in the media as well, because that's critical too.
Great. All right. Thank you both so much. I want to walk our attendees through a couple of extra resources that are available to them. The first is the Training Center at Emily's List. It's trainingcenter.emilyslist.org, as you can see here. It's a great place to get all the information you could ask for in terms of running for office. We have a bunch of new COVID-specific learnings on there as well, so you can be prepared right now. There's also the Run to Win Facebook group, as well as our previous trainings, which are on our website, both of which I would strongly recommend. So please continue your learning with us. Keep coming to webinars. There's so much more to learn. And I wanted to also thank our partners, without whom these webinars would not be possible. And with that, elect women. And thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your days.